Welcome, Motor. Today's daf is daf Tes, and we are learning the different categories. You have a kohen Meshuach or kohen gadol, and you have a nasi, you have a king, and then you have the individual. And we talked about the three Avedas where we say it's a carbon oil of a that if you bring a carbon instead of being a fixed product that you have to bring, it depends on your economic status. So Rabbi Yosef Gluli is of the opinion that a kohen gadol does not have to bring a carbon oil of a He is potter from all those three. And on the other hand, a nasi, a melech does have, and we explained the reason. And the reason is because only someone that has no one, a kohen gadol and a nasi, can never be poor. And because you can never be poor, therefore the whole concept of carbon oil of the doesn't apply to them. Rabbi Akiva says no. I disagree. Regarding at least a nasi, I believe that a nasi does have to bring a carbon oil of the only exception is when it comes to the withholding testimony, because the king never has to give testimony anyway. Okay, so we're up to the Gemara here in the Testament Aleph. Boyimene, about 10 lines on the top of the page. The last of the line is Boyimene. So Boyimene, what about Nasi, a king, a king that suddenly contracted leprosy, which means he's no longer able to act as a king. And we learned in Tanakh about a king that had leprosy and his son took over, learn about it later. So he's no longer sort of the king. What happens with him? What is the status regarding a carbon? Mao, do we say mitchedachia? Once he was a king, therefore he no longer has to bring the normal carbon oil of the yored. Even now that he has leprosy, he doesn't bring a carbon oil of the yored. Or mifta potter, or do we say no? That as long as he's the king, he's exempt. It wasn't complete; he's exempt. But now that he's no longer the king, maybe he should be chayiv like everybody else. Amalei, he said to him, let me ask you a question. Whose money do you think he's going to use? Dilach, your money? Or the Gaza, or his money that he has in his bank account or his treasure? Of course, his own money. Well, so the same issue still applies. He's not shaykh to be poor. Tanya, we're learning about the machleki, about the king, whether he's chayiv in a carbon oil of the yared. And Rabbi Yosef says no, because he's not shaykh to be. There's nobody. What do you call it? He's not shaykh to be poor. He has to be rich, and therefore the whole carbon oil of the yared is not shaykh. And Rabbi Akiva said, kohen gadol, I grant you, is part of a carbon oil of the yared. But and we'll see in the Gemara later that even though according to Rabbi Akiva we say that a kohen gadol is exempt from a carbon oil of the yared, but he does bring his own par. Remember, a kohen gadol is different than everybody else. That everyone else brings a goat or a sheep for a carbon chatas, for a mistake, and a kohen gadol brings a par. And the Gemara will learn, at least according to Rashi and some of the Rishonim, that a kohen gadol is potter from a carbon of a but he still did an aveda, so he still has to bring a par. In a case where he paskin, and didn't pass correctly. Now we had a machlekes regarding a nasi. So basically, a nasi is also exempt because he's not poor. Rabbi Akiva says a nasi is chayiv, except when it comes to shvuas ha'edus, because a nasi, a king, does not go to court. So Tanya, we learned. Rabbi Akiva said Mashiach pater mekula. Mashiach is a Mashiach and Gadol is exempt. Amar Rabbi said, my time Rabbi Akiva. What's Rabbi Akiva's for? It can't be the same logic as before about because he's always wealthy. Then what's the difference in a king or a kohen gadol? So what's his logic? Why a kohen gadol is potter and then why a king is chayiv? Because it's a pasuk. You have a special pasuk, and nothing to do with rich or poor. We're going to learn the pasuk that there's grades in how much money you have. So a carbon of you either bring an animal. If you can't afford that, you bring a bird. If you can't afford that, you bring a siddur se'efa. You bring flour. By a kohen gadol, which he brings every single day, a siddur se'efa flour, it says there's zeh. This is the mincha that he brings. And we learn from the word that Torah highlights zeh. This is it, as if this is the only time he brings a flour offering. He does not bring another case. Which case doesn't he bring? By carbon oil of the yored. And the moment you took away one of the options of carbon oil of the yored, you no longer have any other options, because you have to have all or nothing. In other words, you could be very, very poor and bring a flour offering. You could be very rich and bring an animal. But a kohen gadol, since even if he's very, very poor, he will not bring an oil a flour offering because it says in the pasuk zeh. Therefore, it's not shaykh the whole thing. That's how to keep his logic. Mashenkin and Nasi, doesn't have that pasuk. This is the only time he brings a flower offering. It's a tenth of an aphah, nothing else. Why don't we say what's the big? So say that he can do a flower offering, but he still has the other options: a bird, an animal. Why do you say that he doesn't have it? Maybe the only thing we know from there is he doesn't mean the mincha. My neo Ashira Sefer to bring that. Abalani is Vashidas Lemit Rachman. The Torah didn't exclude the other options. So Gemara said, no. Once you can't do one, you don't do all. How do we know that? Loi Salkadat. I don't think so. The Chivit says a pasuk, the Chiper Olav HaKoyin, the Koyin will forgive him. Al Chatose Ashechata. This is talks about when it wraps up the whole subject of Olav Yedid. Says the Koyin will atone you for your sin, that you sinned May Achas Me'ela. One of these three. There's three times you bring a carbon Olav Yedid. She was beaten, whatever, and three times she was aided, and she was of not sure, and Tumas Mikdash Kedosh of these three things, and the Kohen will forgive you any one of these three. But if you're telling me that any one of these levels, whether you bring the expensive animal or they bring the bird, doesn't make a difference. So if you can bring any one of them, then you're mechaper. If one of them is denied to you, then aim is chaper b'kol. You don't have to bring the other ones either. If that's the logic, let me ask a question. A Mayatza, the Chsiv, it says when it wraps up all the dinim of Oil Yoyed, which are the three cases, it says that with Hoyaki Yeshem la'achas me'ela, right? So it's saying la'achas me'ela, one of these, and yet Rabbi Kiva said clearly that a nasi has to bring a carbon Oil Yoyed regarding two of them, but regarding the shvuas, what do you call it? Regarding shvuas koil, which is the edus, a nasi doesn't bring because he doesn't go to court. You just said if you're not shaykh to one, but says achas, if you're not shaykh to one, reject the whole package. So why does he have a by the other two? According to your way of learning. If you can do every one of them, then you chayv no. But one of them is you're not chayv how come the Mishnah clearly says that? Kiva says nasi chayv is chayv on two of them. Chutz mishmei is chayv, he's not chayv on one of them. According to you, all or none. Abai Rabba, really they get together. The Amit Tavai, they both answer, what are you talking about? May achas mashmule, le achas le mashmule. There's a difference between the pasuk which says me'achas and the pasuk which says lachas. The Gemara right now thinks that somehow or another it says me'achas, it's all none, but when it says le'achas, doesn't mean all none. So what's the difference of mem or lamed? U'maishna me'achas, the mashmule, the kosher rachman, maishna me'achas. Why should it be different? So the Gemara says you misunderstood. It's not the question of a mem or a lamed. It's where the Torah put those words. The mashmale, the kosher rachmana, when it comes to the three different categories, how wealthy you are, what kind of carbon you bring, where did the Torah put these words? Me'achas, when it talks about dalus, the cheap, talks about the flour. The Torah waited until the end, and he writes that down. The kosher rachmana b'seif gabe asilas ephah is written by Sis Ephah. Remember, what's the Torah trying to tell you? The whole the mechaye basilas ephah. If you're shaykh to bring this one, the flour, then mechaye b'kul. Then you chayv and all. The Yisal Kedatim is chayv achas av b'shem is chayv b'kul. Because if you're going to believe that whatever one you're shaykh to, you should bring, then nichtav lahaim achas me'ela b'dalus. Why doesn't it, or in Ambashilas, why doesn't it bring these words by the bird? Or why doesn't it words ma'achas me'ela by the cave, by the animals? Why wait until you talk about the flour to tell you that if you're not shaykh to this dalus to the flour, you're not shaykh at all. So not because of a mem or lamed, but where the Torah put those words. Mitzvah. So far we had two opinions of Yeshua Glili and Rabbi Kiva regarding a carbon oil of the Yedid. Rabbi Yeshua Glili says that a Kohen Gadol and a Nasi are exempt totally. Rabbi Kiva seems to be saying a Kohen Gadol is exempt only, is also all exempt, but a Nasi is chayiv a carbon oil of the Yedid, except when it comes to Shavuos Ha'edus, because he's not going to court. And we'll soon see now. There's a third opinion. It says the Mishnah, a few rules. The rules are as follows. Any mitzvah that remazes your chayiv kares. And shege, you bring a chatas kavua, a fixed one, then the law is as follows. So the Mishnah is sort of wrapping it all up and then throwing another opinion. A yachid, maybe kizbasira, a carbon chatas can either be a lamb or a goat, a female goat. Hanasi, the nasi for a carbon chatas is limited only to a goat and a male goat. A nasi soy brings only a male goat. But a Mashiach and a Bezdin, if a Bezdin made a mistake, they both bring the same Bevian pot. That's case number one. Case number two, Avodas Kachavim, Avodas Zoda is different, is an exception, where Hayachid and the Nasi and the Mashiach, all three of them, Mevin, they bring Sida, a goat. But a bezdin, a female goat. I have a desire. But a bezdin, when it comes to bezdin, they bring two animals. They bring an oila and a chatzis. They bring a par v'soyin, a par and a male goat. Par le oila and v'soyin le chatzis. They bring a par for an oila and a chatzis. Now, osham toli. When it comes to an osham toli, before we learned that a kohen gadol does not bring an osham toli, because we learn now when it says twice the word shegig to tell you only those that they bring a carbon chatzis for this aveda had it been, they knew for sure. Then a suffix you bring an osham toli. But since a kohen gadol does not bring a carbon chatzis b'shegig unless he also paskin himself first that it's mutter. So therefore, it's different. There's no Osham Tali by a Kohen Gadol, just like by a Bezdin. Osham Tali Hayochid v'Hanosi Chayavin. The Nosi is Chayav, but a Mashiach who Bezdin Potter. Now, Osham Vadai. When it comes to a definite Osham, for example, Asham Meilas, you stole from Hegdish, you got to be a carbon Osham. Asham Gezelas. There's certain cases where you bring an Osham, but it's a guilt offering, but it's a Vadai. It's not no suffix here, but the Torah says it's different. You bring an Osham. There we say as follows: Ha Yochid v'Hanosi v'Hamashiach Hayavin. But a Bezin Potter. Why is a Bezin Potter? A couple of reasons. But one of them is because the whole idea of Bezin is that they forgot that this is Osir. But an Osham is Dafke B'Mezid. An Osham is you knew it was Osir. You stole from Hegdish. An Osham Milas you bring. Sorry, an Osham Milas is a Vadai, not by a suffix.
No, I'm saying instead,
so Bezin Paskin. So there's not shaykh, but not shaykh on Osham. This Osham Vada is only when it's not shaykh. What about Korban Oila v'Yodid? We had two opinions before. There was a Gulli and Rabbi Akiva, right? So the Gulli says that they're all Potter, Kohen Gadol and the king of Potter. Rabbi Akiva said that Kohen Gadol is Potter. And later on, the Gemara will see, according to many of the Shainim, they bring a part. But he's part from a carbon oil of the he brings a fixed carbon apart. And when it comes to Mashiach, Rabbi Kiva argues, he says he's chayiv, except Shavuos Koil, which is Bezdin, he doesn't go to Bezdin. Let's see what it says in this Mishnah here. Ashmiyas HaKoil, Balbitus Vasayim, these are the three Avedas that you bring a carbon oil of the Bezdin, a pot. Bezdin only brings where there's a chorus by Vadai and a chatas by Shegig. No such thing as oil of the the Hayochid, the Hanosi, the Hamashiach Hayavin. This Mishnah holds, it seems, that not only a Yochid is Chayiv, but a Nosi is Chayiv, like Rabbi Kiva, but also a Mashiach, Kohen Gadol is also Chayiv. Not like Rabbi Kiva, not like Rabbi Kiva. Ella, but not. She'ein Kohen Gadol Mashiach Chayiv al Tu Mikdash. There are three cases. The Kohen Gadol is Chayiv, but not when it comes to Tumas Mikdash Kedosh. Kohen Gadol there does not bring a carbon oil. Why? We'll soon see from Pasuk that it says we'll soon see from Pasuk. So this is he's the third opinion. He also does bring a carbon oil, except the third one, which is Tumas Mikdash V'Kedoshim. And what do they bring when they do carbon oil? Like everybody else, the two that he's chayiv, it brings the same carbon like everybody else. However, Rabbi Lezer says even when he's chayiv. Let's say I agree that he's chayiv, but Hanosi may be so. The Nasi does not bring, he brings a carbon of the Yedid, but he brings a male goat. Says Gemara, not like a trader says, not like everybody else, they can bring a lamb or a female. Tanya, now in the Braise, Rav Shimon comes and summarizes.
Strange to suggest that Nasi and Kohen Gadol, two people who said to be rich.
That's only one opinion. It's only Rabbi Yisrael Glue who said that. No one else agrees with that in Russia. They say if you just if you can't afford it, but a Kohen Gadol could afford it, bring the more expensive carpet. He's like the rich person. They don't believe in that Russia that you have to be able to be poor. Tanya, the Braise said, he gave a rule the following: if a Yachid brings an Asham Tali, then Hanasi Ki Yitzvah. Reb Shimon said that Nasi also brings an Asham Tali, which we learned before. Right, an Asham Tali. The only one who doesn't bring Asham Tali is a Kohen Gadol and a Bezdin, because they have to have first a psak before they bring a karma chata. So therefore, there's no Asham Tali in such a thing. Mashiach or Bezdin put it. The whole shuba Asham Vadai is a summary similar to the mission. Anyone's an Asham Vadai, everyone's guilty except the Bezdin. Nasi Mashiach Yetzer, but Bezdin put it. Oh, what about a carbon oil v'yodid? Shmiyas HaKoil. When it comes to Aegis, or Bitus Vasayim, when it comes to Shavuot, or Tumas Mikdash Kedoshim, Bezdin Turin. Bezdin does not have the din of Hoyer Bezin only by a chatas that's fixed, not a flow, not a fluctuating chatas. What about Nasi? Mashiach Chayav. This is like Reb Shimon Mishnah. The Nasi and Mashiach is Chayiv. Ella. But She'ein HaNasi Chayiv B'Shmias HaKol. The Nasi is not Chayiv in one of the cases, which is going about the Shvu of Eidos, because he can't go to court. And V'loi Mashiach B'Tumas Migdal Doshev. And the Mashiach is not Chayiv when it comes to Tumah Beis Hamikdash. We'll see later on Pasuk. Then he says it. So that part of the Braisa is very similar to our Mishnah. But then the Braisa continues, which is very cryptic. Any of the Avedas that apply to Oil of the Yedid, Nasi ki Yaitzibai, the Nasi is Chayiv also, but Mashiach, Bezim Turin. Suddenly now he's in Mashiach and Potter. What's going on here? A minute ago he said that the Kohen Mashiach is Chayiv and all except Tumas Migdash, and now he's saying that the Mashiach is Potter like a Bezin, which means the Chayiv is Potter and everything. What's going on here? Pretty much Amri, you tell me sounds like the first part that only betumas migdash we could usher with the potter. A coin goes only potter when it comes to migdash. I will be shmias hakoil betus I'm chayiv. Amos safer. But then you say that a coin god was just like a bezin. And what is a bezin potter by oil in all three cases? Because they don't bring only when it's a chatas kvua, then they bring but not by oil of Kosher Nasi Nasi is Chayiv, but Mashiach Bezin Pturin, and you put together the Mashiach with the Bezin. Tani Mashiach Bezin Pturin. Now if we compare the two, Ma Bezin Pturin, what are they put from Kulin? All three cases. No, Amri Kulin, Kashina Hadodi. I don't understand. There's a contradiction here. But when we have a shua, like kasha, not a problem. Before we learned Rabbi Kiva holds that if you're not, we had before, if Rabbi Kiva holds, like if you're not shaykh to one of the options, you're totally exempt from all the other options as well. Well, Rabbi Shimon hold of that. So when Rabbi Shimon said over here, but if you're like kasha, can bedalus. If we're talking about, degrees. If we are talking about that the Kohen Gadol is only shaykh to the flour, nope. He's potter from flour because it says zeh. No, he agrees to keep it that drosh of zeh. I don't care. That option never applies. So then the Kohen God was potter mikul. All three are Vedas. If all he can afford is a flour, he's potter. However, if we're talking about he can afford more than that, then there's a difference. Two of them he is chayiv, but on one of them, on tumas migdash, he is potter. So the I want to know like kasha can but down. And what's shot? And Reb Shimon, on one hand, holds like Rabbi Akiva bechad, upolugale bechad agi. So Rabbi Akiva bedali dal potter. Kohen Gadol is totally exempt from flour because it says that. Only this is the only flour that you bring. The chavis upolugale bedalas, but he argues that because he's potter for one doesn't automatically exempt him for the other ones, and that's his chayiv, except at kumas migdash. Eloshein Kohen Gadol chayiv betul migdash. No, why not? That person who became tummy and went in, he should be cut down. Hakol. What kind of words is mitoich hakol? From the just saying this is never he. So what? It's obviously trying to teach you halacha mitoich hakol. There's a din that there's a carbon that you bring as a kol. Which carbon do you bring as a coal? Not as an individual didn't have it as a coal. When the bezin paskin wrongly, then the whole coal brings a carbon. The coal or the bezin on their behalf, depending on Meir, Rabbi Huda, Shimon. So, misha karbonai shave lekol. If your carbon, only those people who have the same carbon like a coal, yotzazeh, the Kohen Gadol's exception, she'ein karbonai shave lekol. What do you mean? That his carbon is different than everybody else. How is the carbon different than everybody else? Because on Yom Kippur, he brings his own carbon. So he's not included in the coal. Okay, so therefore he's not included in the coal. That's why he's not shaykh to Tumas Mikdash. Because the Torah says, Mitoich HaKol. Says the Gemara, Im Kain, if you tell me there's ever a case where you are different than the rest of the coal, then you don't get you're not included in Tumas Mikdash. Nasinami and Kabbalah Shabbal Kol. He's also different than everybody else. Why? They bring a par when the whole coal does something, and he brings a sayir, a male goat, if he does his own avera. That's how Rashi learns. The other Shem finds it very difficult. What are you comparing an individual to a coal? So they're saying here that every coal, if every yid from the coal does an avera on their own, they have a choice of bringing a lamb or a goat, and a nasi can only bring a goat. So he's not the same as everybody else either. So if you're saying B'Turko means if he's similar to everybody else, he's not either. So l'chayda, ain't kabbalah shavu l'kol. So we answer you right, but at least shavu b'kapara kippurim once a year Yom Kippur, everyone's included in the carbon except the Kohen Gadol has his own carbons. So therefore, he's included. He's part of the call, and Kohen Gadol is not. Freddie Gemara, in that carbon that the Kohen Gadol brings in Yom Kippur, he includes all the Kohenim. So why are only Kohen Gadol potter? Yeah, and all Kohenim should be potter from a carbon oil of the Yeda, the Tumas Migdash Kedasha, because they're different than everybody else on Yom Kippur. Im Kain Kohenim Amilosh of the Kol, the Kapara the Kippurim. They're also different than everybody else. And so the Gemara, but Kohenim Shavu the Kol B'Shar Mitzvahs the Shana Kula. That what the rest of the year the kohenim at least are the same as everybody else. That if the whole community makes a mistake based on the bezin, they're all included in the same carbon. If remember we learned before, the kohen gadol made the same psak as the bezin, then he's included in their carbon, so he's also included. El Amar Rabba says Rabba, this is how he's supposed to learn. So that only those that they all bring the same idea. That what do you mean? If you did an aveda b'shegig, you bring a carbon or not? I don't care what kind of carbon. You bring a carbon, yeah. All of you bring a carbon, chatas, and even the nasi brings a carbon. Okay, his carbon might be a goat rather than having your choice, but they all bring a carbon. But a kohen gadol does not bring a carbon if he ate fast by mistake, unless he paskin that it was mutter first. My new call, and therefore kohen gadol is not included. Maybe Rabbi Lezer comes along and says that you said what carbon do they bring? If those avedas that they have to bring a carbon oil let's say the nasi, brings a carbon oil or the Mashiach. Kohen Gadol brings a carbon oil. You said you bring the same animal like everybody else, and Rabbi Lezer says no. He brings a soyer, a male goat. When does Rabbi Lezer say that he brings a male goat? When does the nasi bring a soya like his normal? That's his normal carbon for all carbon chatayis. So that he also brings that by carbon oil v'yedid. But which one? Only by tumas migdash kedashav. Now he is potter from the tumah of edus, but he's chayv also by shvua, and by shvua he will bring the normal carbon oil v'yedid. And when Rabbi Lezer says that he brings when Rabbi Lezer says that he brings what do you call soya is only referring to tumas migdash kedashav. Why? Because Tumas Mikdashim is different than the other two. The other two is alav, and you bring carbon avayed. Tumas Mikdashim, if you did it b'meitzah, you get kares. And the main aveda is kares. Will give you a chatos to compensate or to atone. So therefore, since it's a kares, it's almost like any other aveda in the Torah, which you bring a soyer. So to here, it's sort of in between. It's in between a normal carbon, a normal aveda. You get cutters for a mazid by Tumas Migdash. You walk the base of Migdash in tummy. But what? The carbon is different. So essentially, it's no different than any other Aveda. Just since all other Avedas, a Nasi brings a soy and a male goat. So here too, he'll bring a male goat. Bashenke, when it comes to Tumas, let's comes to Shavua, there's no chorus involved over there. It's totally different than everything else. There, he brings a carbon of the like everybody else. So the Gemara. It's almost like a kavua. It's sort of in between, but it's almost like a kavua. And since the yisoid of the Aveda is chorus, the carbon is only to atone you for it. What's that punishment? Chorus. So it's similar to everything else, he brings the son. How about Papa doesn't make sense? These are if Abelaz is talking about all of them, if you can tell me he argues that all of them require a soyer, not just Tumas Migdash, Mechti. Soyer, Nasir, Upar, Mashiach. What does a Nasir bring every carbon? A soyer. What does a Kohen Gadol bring every carbon? A par. Since whenever a Yachid brings a Chatzas, they have the two choices of lamb or goat. A Nasi brings only a goat. A Kohen Gadol brings only a par. So why does Abelaz only talk about on Nasi? He said bring a goat. Why does he also mention and the Kohen Mashiach should bring a par? This is not Mashiach, maybe par, but bring a par. The Shmias Koil Bitus Vasayim by the two that is Chayiv, a Kohen Gadol is Chayiv, which is Shmias Koil Bitus Vasayim, measure a par. No boss. Element like Tani Mashiach, since we don't talk about Mashiach at all, Shmamana, we're only talking about one case. Which case are we talking about? Tumas Migdash V'Kedash Kohen. And the Mashiach is Potter. We just said a Kohen Gadol is Potter from Asham Talu. The only one who's Chayiv, a carbon by Tumas Migdash is a Nasi. And that's why he only talks about Nasi. He only talks about Nasi. That's my rai. So my rai is because it doesn't mention what the din is by a kohen gadol, according to him, it should be whatever your normal carbon is, a par. And because, as I mentioned, is that if you talk about all cases, is a raya that we're only talking about tumas migdash, and since by kohen gadol doesn't bring a carbon at all about tumas migdash, we had before the pasuk that it says here. So they were only talking about a nasi, and that's why only in this case you bring a soil. And why? Because it's similar to all other Avedas you get cuts. How do you know? Maybe talking about all of them. Maybe he holds like Rabbi Kiva Mashiach B'chal's potter. That's why they're talking about Mashiach. All he talks about is a nasi. Maybe he holds that a kohen God doesn't bring out all the ever. Mashiach potter. He said back to him, but Abakiva me potter. How do you know Abakiva says that you potter means potter completely? Maybe he means potter from early Yoda, but you chayiv in a par. And Rashi learns that that's the halacha. Abakiva holds you chayiv in a par. And the Rosh said, "What are you talking about the halacha?" Because you're saying it maybe became halacha. And since when he says, no, in fact, that he takes out these words from the Gemara doesn't make sense because maybe it means par. Therefore, you can make up a new halacha to slug me up. Rabbi Kiva says potter. Potter means potter. You making a chiddush. Potter doesn't mean potter. It means potter no the but you chayiv in a par. So therefore he completely takes it out. But Sulay media, don't ask me any more questions. I want to pop. I'm going to Yechon. Rabbi Yechon said, "Moide Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer's moide she'ein maybe asham. Rabbi Lezer's moide that you don't bring an asham." That you don't bring an asham toli. An asham toli you don't bring. So the Gemara, so even though he says, in other words, even though he says that Tumas Migdash Kedosh is almost similar to any other carbon chatas because it's chorus, as that's only as far we're talking about what kind of animal you should bring. But if you had a suffix, if you walked in the base of English, an asham toli you don't bring because it's not really a chat. Because you don't bring. When do you bring an asham toli? If you did it, definitely didn't have Veda, you bring karma chatas. If you don't know, you bring an asham toli. But over here, this is not really similar to a chatas, and therefore you don't bring. It's only a carbon oil of the yoded, even though essentially it's karis, but it's carbon oil of the yoded. It's not really a chatas. No asham toli. So the Gemara says, "I prove it to you." The Gemara says, "Not prove it." I'll tell you a story about it. Once happened that a Tana sat there before the Sheish and said, "Asham Toli, bo al tumas migdash." Yes, you do bring an Asham Toli in migdash. You know why? Because since you get karas, it's like any other karbachatas, and if you don't know for sure, you bring an Asham Toli. Amalei, he said to him, "Who made it up? Who did you get this from?" You think this is Rabbi Lezer because he wants to say that tumas migdash kedoshav, even though it's a carbon elevated, is similar to any other chatas because a nasi brings a goat like all of his other karbachadas. Maisi nasi sorry, that's why he brings a goat. So you want to think that's like any other chatas, and if it's a something that should totally. Rabbi Lezer is moided. You do not bring an asham tali because it's not really a chatas. It's an elevated. Kasha, if I have no idea what you're saying. No. He's saying you're totally misunderstood pshat. It's only as far as the kind of animal you bring, we'll treat it like a carbon chatas. But as far as asham toli, but the din asham toli is that if you definitely did an aveda by mistake, you bring a carbon chatas. If you don't know, bring an asham toli. But this is a chatas. That's only a chatas kavua. This is a fluctuating chatas, so there's no asham toli. This ends this part. The next whole pedic, which is the very takes us to the end of Horayos, talks more about interesting. First of all, if you started out being a nasi and then you deposed, what happens? And then you still treat like a nasi or not. And then we'll talk about who's more important than this hierarchy, which is quite interesting. Anyway, the main thing is we only have a few more blocks to go. Quite difficult, but it's all right. Have a good day. We'll continue tomorrow. We'll start the new pedic tomorrow.